Making a palette? Oh. Oh. Oh, sorry. Well, I thought she was liking it, but I guess not. Um, start off with a bang. So before I go into this, sorry I have to speak softly. I don't want to wake everybody in the house up. I want to recap from last week um, where he was talking about circumcision. And what he was saying was is that circumcision doesn't do you any good if you don't live by the letter of the law, right? And then he showed the irony that if Gentiles live by the law without being circumcised, and you as a Jew don't live by the law, and you are circumcised, what does that say? And he had already established earlier that the law has been revealed in general revelation, and that they do things that the law requires. So this puts his opponents in quite a bind. But then he is anticipating some disagreements. Now, 3:1-8 has always baffled me. I had to really study it hard, and I had to study multiple commentaries on it. And it's not that they have massive disagreement. It's just that it's really hard to grasp what's happening here. Part of it is that when we say, let's say we were saying somebody had something against us, and we were to say, hey, here's what they would say. We would put that in quotations, okay? And for some reason, that just does not make for the best translation. I didn't look up why that is, but like when you get to the last few chapters here, verses here, 7 and 8, he's actually thinking of things his opponents would say, or maybe it's 6 and 7. Regardless, we'll get there in a minute. And I think that created a lot of confusion for me. I thought it was Paul saying this about himself. And I always was like, I just don't get it. But it's what his opponents would be saying. So let's, first two verses here. Then what advantage has the Jew? Which is a good question, right? Because, why did it matter if you were Jewish? It's not a bad question that his opponents would be asking. I mean, if circumcision doesn't do you any good and you can't obey the law, and the law wasn't there to be obeyed, then what was God doing with Jews, right? And so he says, or what is the value of circumcision? And then he says this, much in every way. To begin with, so he doesn't continue this list, but it must, what he might mean is to begin with, he has several things he wants to address in this area. But he also just may be saying this is the primary argument, that there are other arguments that flow from this that he doesn't have to necessarily discuss. And what I'm getting to here is very interesting. It has to do with, this isn't just a Pauline view, okay? This is sort of Jewish history. And by the way, we embrace this view as well, still to this day. It's a universal ethic. And the idea is that which comes first is greater than that which comes later. Now, you might be tempted to go, well, that's arbitrary. It's not. Think about seniority, or think about lines. And there are other examples that are much more important examples of how we still to this day embrace the idea that what comes earlier has some rank over what comes later, okay? It necessarily doesn't mean that it's actually superior in quality or something like that. It just means that there's an order in which God does things. And so if God places something before something else, it's closer to him. And because he came before everything, that gives him the highest rank, okay? Obviously has the highest quality, but everything that comes from him is going to be lower quality than him, and obviously lower in rank. So I'm going to reread it. Then what advantage has the Jew, or what is the value of circumcision? Much in every way. To begin with, okay, so this is the first of maybe multiple. So you might be saying, well, how come he never continues this list? He may have very good reason not to continue this list. The commentaries didn't address this at all. They just said, kind of glazed over the idea that he only mentions one thing in the list. Well, he may not, this is my speculation, he may not need to go over anything, to have anything else to talk about, because this is the beginning. And so it would be the highest rank argument. I could be wrong about that, but that's my thoughts on it. To begin with, the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. Now, what does that mean? Well, it basically means the words of God, right? Now, here is a great principle if you're having trouble studying a text. This doesn't always work, but it works a lot. If you're struggling with a text, try reading it and rereading it until you get it. Definitely look at other sources and what other people have said, but keep reading the text because you're missing things. I can guarantee you, and especially if it's any kind of modern text, anything the 20th century on, I mean, you could probably sit there and eventually get it. Because I didn't get what was going on here for a while. It's like, okay, the oracles of God. I looked up oracles and I was like, okay. And then it just hit me. They were entrusted with the oracles of God. Now, you can be forgiven for thinking that entrusted means some form of trust between God and them, right? But if you know your theology, you know that God doesn't trust the way we trust. If I entrust you with something, I'm depending on you, more than likely. That's not the case with God. We see over and over, God could have his word spoken any number of ways. He just allowed human beings to participate, right? So, and of course, that theme's going to keep coming up here, the importance of God allowing us to participate. So then, in what way were they entrusted? Now, this is what I mean when you read and reread a text. Really bury yourself deep in it and try to understand it. What does it mean by entrust? If God doesn't need to trust me, what does that mean? I think that it means that it's not just that they would go out with the oracles of God and present them to the world, but that they would live them out. So they would go out with the oracles of God, take them out to the world, and live them out in front of the world. Now, have you read the Old Testament? Because if you have, you can just listen to a lot of preaching and understand that they didn't live up to this. So they were entrusted to demonstrate this as well. And so this is where we get to the next verses and it gets really interesting. What if some were unfaithful? Which obviously is the case. Does their faithlessness nullify the faithfulness of God? By no means. Let God be true, though everyone were a liar. So again, did God need any human being to do what he was doing? Absolutely not. He needed no human beings. He could have done it without them. But he allowed them to participate, right? And so it says this, that you may be, this is a quote from the Old Testament. I believe it's, let me look at it. It's from Isaiah. No. It's from the Psalms. That you may be justified in your words and prevail when you are judged. Okay, so God justified in his words, not necessarily in the deeds of the Jews, right? Okay, now moving on to 5. But if our righteousness serves to show the righteousness of God, what shall we say? That God is unrighteous to inflict wrath on us? Now, here's where it gets to, and he says, by no means, right? For then how could God judge the world? Now, if you read the Old Testament, this particularly the prophets, you'll see over and over the term, in the day of the Lord. In the day of the Lord. In the day of the Lord. All of Jewish history is pushing to a future that's ultimately found in the New Testament as well. It's clarified more in the New Testament. It's pushing towards this end date of judgment, okay? And that's the day of the Lord, where God judges the world. So they don't get a pass, right? They don't get a pass. God is still going to judge the world. Now, why is that important? this is where we get to the two things I thought would normally be quotations in English. In 7, it says, this is not Paul talking about himself. It says, but if through my lie God's truth abounds to his glory, why am I still being condemned as a sinner? And why not do evil? This is the second one, that good may come. And there's a name for that, antinomy or something like that. I saw that in the commentary. I didn't have a chance to look it up. I normally would. The two quotes here, okay? What are these? This was a philosophy, and the idea was this: if God corrects the evil that you do with goodness, maybe you could make the case then you could do more evil, so that way your motive is to create more good. Paul calls this slander, and he's right. This is slander. Maybe it wasn't a philosophy that anyone embraced. In this case here in Romans, I think what's happening is they were trying to show the absurdity of the gospel by saying, hey, here's the conclusions of what Paul is preaching. And of course, that's not only is that not the preaching of the gospel, obviously, but it is not the pattern you see from Paul's life. Read Acts. He lives out Old Testament wisdom despite knowing certain things are going to take place regardless. When he was on the boat that was sinking and the sailors were getting ready to leave the boat, you remember me talking about that if you've been here. And he has the guards cut the dinghies off the boat so that they can't escape, right? Well, Paul didn't. The head of the guards did. Why did he do that? If God's prophecy was that they would go there, maybe what they could have done is let the sailors go, and then there'd be an even more dramatic miracle take place. Same concept, right? But Paul didn't do that. He looked at the guard and he said, if you let these sailors go, we're going to die. How did he know that? Old Testament wisdom is how he knew that. He knew not to take a prophecy and go, okay, yeah, and challenge God. He never would have done that. So we know from a wider scope that Paul didn't preach that, obviously. And here in Romans, he clarifies it. But the point here, if you want to understand this first part of chapter 3, is he is dealing with opposition and potential objections that people may make about the relationship. Again, he wants to show beyond the shadow of a doubt that there is parity between the Greek and the Jew. Okay, and that's what matters. Finally, in this last second half of verse 8, some people slanderously charge us with saying, he says this, their condemnation is just. Now, earlier in Romans 1, what does he say? He talks about sin, right? Particularly homosexuality. And he says, heck, let's just read it. It's right here. They received in themselves the due penalty for their error. Their condemnation is just. So what's he talking about? It's this final judgment. The zany professor's glasses are crooked. It's that final judgment. So they're clearly not going, whoa, I just saw a time on this. Okay, so anyway, thank you for your time and appreciate your attention.